People think the breakdown is a very angry thing or a painful thing. It's not. For me, it was the worst thing in life is feeling nothing at all.
Hello and welcome to Interactions Thrivalism. I'm Toby Brown, Interactions Head of Marketing, and this week I'm talking to Nick Elston. Nick's a force of nature who wears a lot of hats. He works with companies to increase their employee engagement with mental wellbeing initiatives. He's a transformational speaking coach, he's an inspirational speaker, and he's one of Bristol's biggest country and western fans. We discuss the need for leaders to show vulnerability, the best ways to help employees improve their mental health, and the power of storytelling in improving our quality of life. There's loads to unpack in this episode. I think it's a great one. I hope you enjoy it. Nick Elston, lovely to have you on Thrivalism. Welcome. I've been struggling for ways to describe you, I guess. So, mental health activist, inspirational speaker. What's your go-to sort of self-definition for what you do?
So I guess the LinkedIn kind of overview is an inspirational speaker on the lived experience of mental health and a transformational speaking coach. That's the title and the disclaimer, because working in the mental health space as a non-solution focused person, I'm not a coach, counsellor or advisor. You wouldn't want that, trust me. Far too empathic for all that kind of stuff. Take on the vibe, whoever I'm talking to, not great. I shouldn't work for kind of like Samaritans or anything. Anyway, I digress. But for me, it's an upfront contract because for me, I focus on the engagement. You can have all the initiatives and solutions under the sun. Unless you get the engagement, absolutely nothing changes. So I do that through inspiration and through sharing my lived experience, and not exclusively with men, but especially with men. There's a real challenge around this that we want to be fixed when we need to be fixed, but we don't want people to see that we want to be fixed. And it's still a rarity for a man to be working in the space and the angle that I take. The speaking coach element, actually, it's not about presentation skills, as you definitely borne witness to now. For me, it's about our narrative and actually how that affects how we go forward, and absolutely links to mental health and how do we deliver emotional messages and emotional stories personally and professionally to start to thrive.
That's amazing. There's so much to unpack there. Probably best to start off with the lived experience element of what you talked about. So how did you end up doing what you do and what's your road to it?
So I had mental illness in my childhood. I had obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, which then kind of morphed and grew into generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, in my teens and into adult life. And then for over a decade, I was running at a really high state of burnout, because what they don't tell you about kind of high anxiety is you can be very, very successful driven by high anxiety. And we know this to be true, really. We see this a lot in the professional space. But you can only run for so long until you stop, and therein lies the problem. That in 2012, I had a breakdown outside of a Premier Inn in Somerset. Classy guy.
That's enough. That's enough to tip anyone over the edge.
Yeah, choose your breakdowns well. If only I was talking about this stuff for a living, Toby, I would have gone with Hilton or something more exclusive. We got a deal out of his. But Lenny Henry was nowhere to be seen when I needed him. But I've been to a business networking meeting, and we all know business networking is the ultimate kind of bastion of wearing a mask, that you go along, pretend to be strong, successful, happy and confident, eat some breakfast, sell some stuff, hopefully, and then you leave. And you know you're wearing a mask when you leave any given situation, and your body and your soul just drops. Who are you when no one's looking, when you've got no one to live up to, no one to get the accountability or the likes of? And for me, that was where it kind of tipped over. I sat in the car in that car park, beautiful Friday sunny morning, and for 3 hours I couldn't move. People think the breakdown is a very angry thing or a painful thing. It's not. For me, it was the worst thing in life is feeling nothing at all. To cut off feeling hate, you cut off feeling love, to cut off feeling bad, you cut off feeling good. You can't have one without the other. So you end up feeling completely lost. You feel absolutely numb. And so for 3 hours, I just couldn't function. Speaking was my way back, weirdly. That a couple of weeks later, I turned up at the same professional event and I shared what had happened 2 weeks before. I also shared about OCD in kids. It's cheap therapy, like 15 quid including breakfast. It was cheap therapy. It was a brain dump. But actually what I found was that it's the kind of the angle changed, because what was a really selfish move on my part, and I encourage everybody to be selfish at that point in their lives, that people started sharing their stuff with me. And this is what ties in with the speaking coaching, I guess, that by showing people me, the truth, with capital T's and completely unfiltered, people that I knew for years in a professional context started sharing their stuff with me straight away. Not just about mental illness, but about sexuality and race and gender and abuse and addiction, all the other things that we just don't talk about, especially in 2012. And that's kind of where I saw the gap. Why is it all these people have got these struggles in life, but they don't feel educated, inspired, empowered to reach out for help? And that's what I wanted to do. I knew right from the start I didn't want to be solution focused. I didn't want to be that fix in that sense. But I wanted to get people from this position of pain or frustration to the doors of people that can actually help them.
Can we just go back to that moment in the car? Well, not moment, 3 hours is quite a long moment. What was it that changed between that 3 hours and then you deciding to go back to that room of people? And what happened in your head to make you think, I need to share this? And
I think, without getting too dark about this, but I think it's important to say that this was going to be something that consumed me, or I had to let it out. And I think for me, that was the thing that, not that I recommend anybody get to that point in their lives, but for once, that kind of fear left me, that fear of being judged or dismissed or ridiculed or all these other things we experienced. So actually, for me, it felt like it's going to be like a death by police kind of blaze of glory moment. By standing up and telling people the truth, I just saw myself starfished on the floor with a cloud of dust, like an old Western kind of thing. But so it took that fear away. And I think there's something to be said for that, especially when it comes to speaking generally. I think Harvard considered public speaking a greater fear than death. And we were talking about this just before we hit record, that in my years of coaching people to speak publicly, actually, that's not what people are afraid of. People are afraid of a very simple thing. It's a huge thing, but it's a simple thing. And that's a very human fear of rejection. It goes through everything. It goes through imposter syndrome, procrastination. Again, years being in sales, in client engaging situations, that I was highly anxious, highly performing, but highly anxious, and recognizing that I was an introvert working in an extrovert's world, that I worked out far too late, that I recharge in my own company. But I was going from being in a group situation to a group situation to a group situation. And genuinely, you can only run for so long until you stop. And that's what happens, sadly.
There's common misconceptions about introverts and extroverts, aren't there, I think? And because it's about where you get your energy from, isn't it? Rather than about how you handle yourself in a room full of people. And going back to the generalized anxiety disorder, what are some of the elements of that drove you to be successful? Like, what's the correlation there between the...
It's interesting. People would have heard of OCD more than GAD, but GAD is statistically more common. I think OCD has been trivialized. Channel 4's OCD cleaners, or I'm a little bit OCD. Doesn't kind of work that way.
You like putting your scatter cushions back in the bed. That's exactly, fine. Yeah. That's not OCD.
Yeah, I've got the neatest Spotify playlist you ever want to see. I'm very organised, that kind of stuff. So there are pluses to this, sure. But I think with GAD, it's kind of, if you've not heard of it, it's obsessive compulsive anxiety. And I think the reason why we never question high anxiety is, and it's my role as a lived experience speaker, is to give you how things feel and how things look from a personal point of view, because you don't see it on a diagnosis, you don't see it on the bullet points. And absolutely, I encourage everybody to look up GAD on the NHS website right now. It's important to recognise. But the reality is very different in the sense that, do you constantly ruminate on things that have gone wrong before? Past events, relationships, decisions, and you replay those with a very real feeling of guilt and anxiety, regret and remorse today. And so therefore, physically, it's very, very current. But the problem is, when we compare our past in our present, we'll never remember something 100% in its accuracy. And the worse we feel today, the worse we'll remember that situation to have been. And that's the reason why anxiety can bring us down and depression can keep us down, is because it reaffirms that belief that we're no good in that sense. And it fuels that extra anxiety. It's the ultimate pursuit of the uncontrollable in that sense. Or maybe you catastrophize the other way. You wake up every day with that feeling of dread or fear or assumption that something's going to go wrong, that your partner's going to do something to hurt you, all these kind of different things that go through our heads. For me, it's the assumption part, which is the most dangerous thing around high anxiety. We're constantly, in fact, we're hardwired to look for danger and fear. So most of the time we find it because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for proof that what we fear is going to happen. So GAD can drive us to be very successful because we just never let the ball drop. And especially in a client-facing sales, account management, all the partnership roles that I was doing in my employee career, you were living in constant paranoia. Sales and kind of high anxiety is a heady mix of paranoia and fear, that you're constantly driven by the perceived failure of not following through on what you want to do.
And you're constantly trying to keep that fear at bay by overachieving and overperforming and creating a buffer for yourself.
Yeah, and whilst putting this mask on, that you're kind of like, just kind of like calm iceberg, breezing through life kind of thing. Because this is a thing that people associate kind of success, the visible, what we see as success, with the reality. And there's no correlation. I mean, right now I coach kind of professional footballers and sports people. people that are very high up in business around public speaking, I guarantee you there is no link between having more money and having better mental health. I think there's a challenge around that, especially when it comes to things like the cost of living crisis. There is an absolute link, a very strong link between your money and your mental health. And people that have actually had no challenges up to now may start to develop new challenges due to where we are right now in terms of the economy. But it doesn't mean that more money is better. We can actually start to find different ways of thriving where we are right now, given everything that we have or don't have in some cases.
That's a relief.
Yeah, but do you know what? Somebody said to me once, like, there's a lot of kind of people try to find happiness in the pursuit of material objects, and they said if you buy an Aston Martin, 3 months later it's just going to be a car. You want something else, which I agree with in principle, but I do want to test that theory one day.
Yeah, I mean, you want to find out for yourself.
Yeah,
don't you?
You got to test. Life's all about experiences, right?
I need to crash an Aston Martin, then I'll tell you if I'm happy.
Exactly. Yeah.
You see people in very expensive cars, and they look pretty happy. I mean, it might be a mask, but they look pretty happy as they speed by. So obviously there's a lot of factors at the moment that are increasing pressure and stress and mental ill health. When you work with organisations and when you go into organisations and businesses to help them, what are the key things you're seeing that they need help with and that employees are asking for help with?
I think the first one, and actually you've touched on it already and delivered it perfectly, you'll be relieved to hear, is actually this terminology of mental health. Mental health is very often used in the negative, to the extent that people will say to me after like a conference or a talk that, Nick, I have mental health. Yeah, absolutely you do. We all do. Whether it's good or bad, you have mental health. What they mean is that they may have poor mental health or they're struggling or ill mental health, as you say. And I think actually the first thing that cultures, especially in a workplace environment, can do is start to use the term mental health respectfully and in its neutral state. So mental health is a neutral thing, like physical health. It's also a million miles away from mental illness. There should be nowhere near kind of absenteeism, presenteeism, all the other isms that we measure. With also that in mind, we need to start to consider mental health as a muscle, something that we can exercise and nurture and nourish and care for every single day, even if it's in between periods of help, medication, therapy, counselling, coaching, to give ourselves every chance of being more successful, stronger, happier, whatever these really subjective terms mean to you every day. I think that's the thing that companies, that's the bit I first work on, is actually using it in its neutral sense. The second thing is to encourage people to have more vulnerable conversations. So I've written a lot for publications such as like HR Zone and HR Director around this stuff, and having vulnerable conversations in spaces that we've not always been vulnerable. So if you're having conversations around furlough, redundancy, all these kind of big, heavy subjects, there's no harm in saying or showing a little bit of yourself to say, look, I don't want to be having this conversation, or I've been there before, I know how you're feeling. It doesn't make it easier for the other person, but what you're doing is you're showing humanity, and that is mirrored. Despite what you hear on the news and social media, humans are essentially good. Humans do essentially want you to succeed if you only show people what you want. So it's changing the culture around mental health. It's starting to introduce vulnerability into its leadership so that people start to work out they're dealing with humans, not a blunt tool of the company. And I think finally it's kind of working on what I call your battery. So whatever drives you, whatever the thing is that gets you up and going in the morning, that's the bit that we should work on. So I'm not the guy to talk about nutrition and exercise. I'm 6'4" and 24 stone. So I'm quite obviously not going to be that guy. I think that's also my selling point, that I don't look like Joe Wicks. It's a selling point. So,
well, you know, like mental health, nutrition is just a spectrum, isn't it?
Yeah.
Nutrition's neutral. You can talk about
I work
nutrition.
for KFC, for God's sake. So I don't know, I'll digress. I think the point is, so I think there's two extremes that people see about mental health, especially in a professional environment. They either think it's going to be dry, heavy, boring, I'm trying to fix them. Not that at all. Or I'm going to be lighting a bonfire outside, running around naked with a joystick. I'm up for anything, by the way. But somewhere in the middle...
Yeah, I mean, that sounds good.
Somewhere in the middle is the truth. And I think that's what we need to start to do in organisations, is start to work out, actually, that thing that gets us all up and going in the morning, our batteries, whatever that means to you, whether it's faith, the universe, religion, or being a Jedi, whatever your thing is in life, that's the bit that we should focus on, and asking ourselves 4 big questions. And the 4 big questions are: what in life nourishes us? What in life depletes us? And who in life nourishes us? And who in life depletes us? And if anybody gets divorced following this, Toby, take me off the billion, I was never here. But I think the point is, those are the key things we need to start to understand. How do we get our energy? And it works different for different people. So it's about building a playbook for all of their people. That's kind of what I do, I guess.
And we'll come on to that playbook in a sec, but when we're talking about instilling a sense of vulnerability in leadership, that sounds like that can be quite a challenging conversation to have with those leadership teams. How do you approach it, and how do you start getting them to show their vulnerability?
It can be challenging because I'm 44, so my generation and back have been taught to or conditioned to believe that we don't trust work with our personal stuff. And that's the reason why people don't engage in well-being initiatives through a company. I like to look at the reason why don't people engage in things, not why do they or why should they, why don't they engage in things? Because in Bristol, where I am, there's a 3-month waiting list for CBT assessment even before you get the therapy, whereas through an organisation you can get help probably today or tomorrow. Why don't we do that? It's kind of the thing. So for me, it's looking at why aren't these leaders prepared to show themselves? Now, that can come down to several things. How I introduce that is actually I'm going up to Virgin Media today to work with their Leeds team tomorrow, actually doing this. I'll deliver a talk in the morning, so culturally set the tone of what I'm about, it'll be very different, that kind of thing. But the rest of the day, I'm going to have one-to-ones with people, very informal one-to-ones that are off the record, completely confidential. The themes get reported back to whoever I'm working for at the time, so people know how to direct future initiatives. But for each of those conversations, despite how it starts, everybody ends up sharing. Everybody shares their personal stuff because, to me, work-life balance is a myth. There is no such thing. It's about balance. It's the same you that shows up here on this podcast with me today than it is the one that goes home later on or even goes into the next room if we're working from home. So I think that's the thing we need to focus on. You'll feel guilty if you put down your laptop at 3 o'clock this afternoon, but you'll feel nothing about checking your emails at 11 o'clock tonight. And we need to change that. And I think in the UK especially, we've got a real problem with that from a leadership perspective. We have been conditioned to believe that self-care is selfish. So we'll feel guilty when we put ourselves before anything or anyone, so we don't. And we run again a little weaker tomorrow. Now, when I work with my US audiences, it's very different. Actually, it's probably too much the other way in that sense. But like all these things, somewhere in the middle is the truth. We need to be more selfish as leaders. We need to be prepared to show more of ourselves to build deeper relationships. And that takes time. But it happens, and it happens everywhere that I go.
And do you find much pushback from leadership on that sort of stuff? Because you mentioned earlier, maybe a leader is talking about redundancies and they're saying, this is really painful for me to do. I know how you feel. But that can result in kickback, can it, on the other side? Like, well, it's easy for you to say that because you're sat in an ivory tower making me redundant. So what are some of the challenges and barriers you find when you have those conversations?
I mean, that is a challenge. I think the challenge is we assume how it's going to play out after what we've just said. I can guarantee this podcast has not been scripted. And as far as I'm concerned, this is working brilliantly. So, and that's kind of how I work, really. And I think that's how I try and help other people to work as well. From a traditional business mindset, we've been taught to be very careful with what we say. We don't want to be caught out. We don't want to be all these kind of different things, legalities. And absolutely, we need to abide to a process. Of course we do. But why are we trained not to show humanity? And I think that's the thing. We see it as a weakness, and it's absolutely not a weakness. So for me, it's about delivering it in a way where people genuinely feel you. And that's why I think it's not about what you say, it's about how you make people feel. You made me feel very welcome before we even started the show because that's the way you made me feel. It's not about what you said. I can't remember what you said on our first call, to be honest with you.
It was cracking. I'll tell you that. It's really good.
But you made me feel at home, so I really look forward to doing this today. And that's kind of the point, really. And it's the same with leaders as well. Interestingly, I believe true change from an organisation comes from the middle, not from the grassroots and not from the top. I think for me, true change comes from the middle. It's the line managers, the team managers, because usually they have more of a passion to change their immediate surroundings as well. Now, there are pitfalls to that as well, of course, because very often people become mental health first aiders or leaders because they have its default setting to try and help as many people as possible. But sometimes it's because they've had poor experiences of mental health or being managed poorly themselves. So actually, you may become that wounded healer in that sense. So they become more, I guess, that default setting becomes more subservient to take on the burden of whoever they're talking to. So actually the biggest challenge comes from middle management as well. Who looks after the people that looks after people? But I know that I've had a CEO of a large client I work with on my podcast, and he was very, very open about his mental health experiences. But like you said, when I was in the business a month later, somebody said to me, well, of course he can be open because he hasn't got this fear of being sacked. And that's the thing. Nobody has that fear of being sacked now, thankfully, in that sense. And I think that's the thing we need to start to check our narrative. It all comes back to our narrative and how we talk up to ourselves. I think in life, generally, we either talk ourselves into a losing game by default. I can never do that. I'm not fat enough, thin enough, fast enough, strong enough, all the kind of enoughs. Or we talk ourselves into a winning game, but very rarely do we do that. Very often we're kind of telling ourselves we cannot do something. And very often, without getting too deep about this, that can be come from a limiting belief that's been formed in our formative years. And that's one of the elements I talk about as part of my talk, is around this conditioning element of our environment.
Those limiting beliefs are really interesting. We had a company come in where I worked previously, and they did some workshops around limiting beliefs and stuff. And I can't remember exactly what mine was at the time, but it was quite a complex one. And they said, right, tell us about it. And I told them about it. And they went, yeah, that's tricky, isn't it? And just left me with it. And I was like, right, are you gonna give me some advice on how to get around it? And they were like, no, that's a really hard one. I was like, right, thanks for that. Left me in a really bad place.
Yes, cheers, thank you.
Got to be careful.
You've been a great audience. Thank you very much. See you later.
I'm just going to jump out this window.
Exactly, yeah. Can I just jump in, Toby? That's a really important point. Ethically and morally, if I'm not there as a solution-focused person, but I'm encouraging these conversations, for me, I see my role as giving you more ammo to ask better questions of yourself. But you can't leave people there. You can't say, and then he died. See you later, guys. You've been a great... You can't leave people there. I think that's the difference between solution-focused and non-solution-focused, and why I very actively pitch myself as not being solution-focused. But you should have been signposted to a direction forward. So even if they can help, do you see what I mean? So that was a bit of a poor experience. If you want to chat about that away from here, please do let me know.
I will, yeah. I'm going to well up
exactly,
in a second. When you go into an organisation and you say, look, I'm not solution focused, does that make it a harder sell for you because they want a package that comes with solutions?
No, it's weird. It's easier. I talk about this a lot with, I have this kind of program that I help speakers to go pro. So if you want to become a professional speaker in its truest sense, you get paid to do it. That's kind of what I do. And I think it's one of the things that I say, that you need to recognize that the talk is the product in that sense. So by me approaching a client and saying, I'm not solution focused, I'm here to increase engagement in all the great things you've got going on, actually it becomes an easier decision for them because I'm not there to disrupt anything. Now, if I was saying I've got this 12-week program, that's a bigger decision. It makes life more complicated. From an attendee perspective, from an employee perspective, by me going in as not a solution-focused person, it disarms people. And people will tell me stuff they don't even tell their GP. In fact, even their GP, because look, the elephant in the room right now, we no longer have a familial relationship with our GP or even the medical profession generally. I genuinely couldn't tell you my GP is. Our practice closed down a while ago. So we have more trust and rapport with people very quickly than they do have with the medical profession. So what I do is I see that as, by me not being there with any agenda to fix them, people will open up to me and share everything, and then I signpost them to the help that they need. And the engagement goes up like dramatically high into like employee assistance programs and all these kind of different things. It's a crazy thing that just one simple conversation can point people in a different direction. So by me doing that, I just deliver a different angle on things. I'm not there to do anything else.
You're not there to impose threatening change.
Or as unthreatening as I can be, a 6'4", 24 stone. But
we had a guest on previously called Amy Keane, who does some great work, a bit in this space, a little bit of overlap. And we were discussing things that businesses and organisations do that sort of well-intentioned, but actually don't particularly work well. And she brought up the point that mental health first aiders are a bit of a sticking plaster on the problem and sort of push that responsibility back onto the employees rather than the organisation. What are some things that you sometimes see well-intentioned companies trying that are actually a bit misguided or not really hitting the mark?
Yeah, I think absolutely. With the mental health first aiders, I agree with Amy completely, that very often people are in that position because they have had poor mental health, either indirectly or directly affecting them. So therefore, they become that wounded healer. They will take on the burden of whoever they talk to, which is great for the other person, but where do they go with that? And again, that who looks after the people who looks after people. So I think certainly that does become, and to the extent, I know there are some organisations I work with now who don't do anything around that, which I don't also is not saying it's the right thing either. I think for me, there's two things that really kind of are my bugbears. A defined return on investment on mental health, that grates with me. I kind of get it because I do a lot of work in the financial services space, so I kind of get where they're coming from this. But for me, it shouldn't be a defining factor in why you should do something.
But is that even possible to calculate?
Well, I guess there's an amazing guy that I know who was the finance director of Starbucks that I've spoken alongside. We kept in touch and stuff. He has created this kind of, and I'm not sure if it was Houston Starbucks, don't quote me on this, but did this presentation, this talk that I was at, that he was saying that there is a loose kind of equation that you can actually start to put an ROI on it. But I think for me, it's when companies use that as a lead. It's kind of like saying, should we, this is a weird one, but go with me, should we like treat this dog badly, or actually is it going to be more effective for us if we give it all like food and stuff? It's a really weird thing. And I don't know why people kind of take that approach, because surely the return on investment, apart from ethically and morally, the return on investment is you would have a happier workforce, a more fulfilled workforce with purpose, that has to be said too. But also then you can start to pick apart mental health and mental illness, because very often the companies that focus on ROI and when it comes to mental health and well-being, they lump all those things in together. I mean, there's one company who will remain nameless that when I first started working with them said their absenteeism when they were doing ROI on mental health was 28% of their workforce was out any one time. It wasn't. It was 3% mental illness. The others, that's the bit that I can work on. That's the mental health element, the personal development side of things, I guess, the bits that we can start to work on every day.
So what was that other segment then? The 3% were mental illness. What was the other?
Yeah, the 3% was, 3% in a large workforce is still like, obviously we don't want to see any kind of mental illness kind of absenteeism at all, but 3% of the workforce to be off at any one time with mental illness is bad, but obviously it's a lot less than 28%.
So was that just an incorrectly reported figure, or were there people off for different reasons?
It was because it was being lumped in with if somebody was having mental health challenges generally. So it was how they were labelling the reason for absenteeism. And as I said, I'm not a details guy in terms of digging down into all those kind of things. I leave that for other people that are great in that space, and I do signpost those kind of people. But for me, it was a really strong indication, this is quite early on, of actually how people can lump things in, because very often the same, mental health gets lumped in with diversity and inclusion, because actually we just give people these responsibilities. And the people that champion these things are amazing people. They have a desire and a passion. But again, that's why I believe true change starts there. Because if we start kind of piling these things in all together, it waters down the message in that sense. There are certainly common aspects. I mean, I work with victims of domestic abuse. I work with students who have very poor male role model images. I also work in the prison system as a speaking coach as well, as a transformational tool. And it's really, really interesting that all these kind of environments, that they have different challenges, but essentially it comes down to that mental health versus mental illness conversation. And the mental health, as we've already discussed, we can work on at any one given point, however that may be. I hope that makes sense. I probably rambled a bit there, but
yeah, no, that's good. If you're in a leadership role in an organisation and you're looking across your organisation and you're thinking, I need to take some urgent steps to improve everybody's mental well-being, what are some of the first things you should engage with and try to do?
Yeah, I think for me, the first question is mental health versus mental illness. Really dig down as to promoting the differences between those two things, so that everybody has a great understanding that mental health being a neutral state like physical health. When we start to see it as a neutral state, because if I said to you, right, I was working on my physical health, you think, oh, that's cool. If I said I'm working on my mental health, straight away people think, oh, he's got a problem. It's interesting, right? It's the terminology. So I would change the language, the narrative around this term of mental health. And secondly, it would be start to look at vulnerability. Lived experience is one of the most powerful vehicles that can drive engagement to any solution or initiative. And not just me doing what I do, actually having people within the organization deliver their experiences to their people, and actually having one of your own as that is a very, very powerful thing. When I first went self-employed as a speaker, I was working many years ago now, I was working for Tesco 36 hours a week around that, because apparently the mortgage doesn't get paid on dreams and missions, right? So for 36 hours a week, I was dressed in high vis. Now, long story short, I sent off an article to the staff magazine. They were looking for mental health contributions, and they published it. Now, by publishing that internally, it went to all of the stores in the country. The amount of engagement I had from being one of their own, as just a driver delivering kind of groceries as I was doing it at a time, big hairy blokes coming up to me talking about what's going on with them. It's an amazing thing and it gives people that kind of liberation to start to talk about their own stuff. And weirdly, that's what started to get me out of Tesco, because it was the success of that article. They put me in the Public magazine, which went out to millions. And that's what got me out of Tesco, the success of the coverage of that magazine. So
shot themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
Missing one of their best
opportunities.
drivers.
Yeah. I was good. I did crash a couple of times, but I was good. Opportunities are everywhere. And I think that's why attitude is everything when it comes to life and business. That sometimes you'll find yourself in a position you don't want to be in. It's the attitude bit that really gets you. I could have easily said, I don't want to be doing this, I'm just earning money to pay the mortgage. But actually, by being proactive, looking out for opportunities, submitting articles, asking for content and this kind of different stuff, that's what got me out. And I think very often, like whether it's mentally, physically, or in our professions, that we find ourselves in a place we don't want to be, but we stop looking. And it's very easy to find out why we feel worse and worse every day. And again, you can only run for so long until you stop.
Yeah, that seems like a really depressing and bleak note to wrap up on. So I think we'll leave it there. That's good. Thanks for that. Very empowering.
I've got a more empowering quote to finish on, if that's going to help.
Go on then. Let's whack it in at the end. Yeah, go on.
I've got to finish with this. I finish with this It's also the name of a great country track that I love, big country music. Every storm runs out of rain. I think genuinely we need to know that right now, that every storm we've ever been through, you at least survive, because you're here. Most of the time we thrive. Most of the time we learn. Most of the time we evolve. We just don't see it at the time. Very often you say, like, I'm done with that. I'm done with him. I'm done with her. I'm done with this. You're never done. You just don't know what the way forward looks like right now. And I think essentially what drives us all is the hope of something better. And this will pass. Whatever you're going through right now, this will pass. And every storm does run out of rain.
That is lovely, but I'm going to edit out because I want to finish on a bleak note. I'm sold on that now. That's where we're going to end. Nick, it's been great having you on, mate. Where can people find out more about you and what you do?
It's just very big and simple, just like me, nickelston.com.
Amazing. Thanks so much. We'll put that in the show notes too. Nick, it's been great to have you on. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it. Thanks, Toby.
Well, I really enjoyed that chat with Nick. I hope you did too. If you did, give us a decent rating on your podcast app of choice. This is now the end of season 4 of Thrivalism. We'll be back in early 2023 with season 5, assuming there's no nuclear war before then. So take care and we'll see you for season 5.